The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Preamble. Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Whereas disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind, and the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief, and freedom from fear and want has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people. Whereas it is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse, as a last resort, to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law. Whereas it is essential to promote the development of friendly relations between nations. Whereas the people of the United Nations have in the Charter reaffirmed their faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, and in the equal rights of men and women, and have determined to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. Whereas member states have pledged themselves to achieve, in cooperation with the United Nations, the promotion of universal respect and for the observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Whereas a common understanding of these rights and freedoms is of the greatest importance, for the full realization of this pledge. Now, therefore, the General Assembly proclaims this Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations, to the end that every individual and every organ of society, keeping this declaration constantly in mind, shall strive by teaching and educating to promote respect for those rights and freedoms, and by the progressive measures, national and international, to secure their universal and effective recognition and observance, both among the peoples of the member states themselves and among the peoples of territories under their jurisdiction. The Canadian Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. Whereas Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Guarantee of Rights and Freedoms. Article 1. Article 1. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it, subject only to the such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So this is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now the first thing that we have to note is that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, it does not mention human. Like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Freedoms, there's no distinction in the title of this charter that it is for humans. It's just mentioning that in Canada there are certain rights and freedoms, and this charter will teach you what the rights and freedoms are. Now, if it does not mention human, we have to understand who does the Charter apply to, or what does the Charter apply to. So we ask the question, who does this Charter apply to then? When we look into the Charter and we begin to read all the articles of the Charter, we are going to see objects or subjects. Subjects. Declaring who the Charter applies to. Now, there are three different subjects that we find in the Charter. We find an everyone, we find a citizen, and we find a person. Now, all three of these subjects, they are each a designation under law. When you mention the word everyone, it entitles a certain designation. When you mention the word citizen, it entitles a certain designation. When you mention the word person, it entitles a certain designation. And each one of these subjects have different obligations and different duties within Canada and to the Charter itself, or to the laws of Canada themselves. Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Article 3. Every citizen of Canada. Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Article 23. Citizens of Canada. Sub-Article 2. Citizens of Canada. Sub-Article 3. The right of citizens of Canada. Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Article 7. Everyone has the right to life. Article 8. Everyone has the right to be secure. Article 9. Everyone has the right not to be arbitrarily. Article 10. Everyone has the right. Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Article 11. Any person. In the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the first subject that we see in operation is talking about an everyone. It uses the term everyone. Now that term is all-inclusive. It can mean each one of all, each one, a whole, constituting one, or a group, a whole. So if you look at it like that, if we say that in Canada, every citizen belongs as a group. So one citizen makes up a group of citizens. So everyone, all citizens. If you look and say in Canada, there are legal persons. If you say, I would have a legal person, or you would have a legal person, and each one of those legal persons, they make up a group of legal persons that are in operation here in Canada. Now, that would take care of two subjects, the citizen and the person. Now in everyone, there's also another subject in operation. There's also another designation that can be taken. And I left it at question mark, because hopefully it clicked and you got it, that that designation is one of a human, which is recognized under their charters and in law. And that human is one of all humans, the human race. And that is the most important designation. Black laws. Fictitious person, see artificial person. Juridical person, see artificial person. Juristic person, see artificial person. Legal person, see artificial person. Moral person, see artificial person. Black laws. Artificial person. An entity such as a corporation created by law and given certain legal rights and duties of a human being, a being, real or imaginary, who, for the purpose of legal reasoning, is treated more or less as a human being. So more or less, and given certain rights. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the first subject that we're going to deal with is person. Person. And obviously, hopefully by now you know that that refers to a juridical personality. which means an artificial person. It's something that's created by law. It's created through paperwork or through a recognition, giving it recognition, and it's given certain rights and duties of a human being, but it's not recognized as a human being under law. So it's considered a legal person. It can also be considered everyone in the Charter, because everyone refers to a group or a group of people or one of the group. So there's a whole bunch of legal persons in Canada that form a group. Therefore, they can be considered everyone in the Charter, but when they're considered everyone in the Charter, they're limited in the operations of their freedoms of expressions and rights through the laws. They won't be able to express their freedom that the other subject who belongs to everyone, who you will see shortly, would be able to express. So, this person here is stripped of human rights and is controlled by regulations. So it's not able to express the person what a human is able to express. Now a human is also one of a group of humans. So when I say that everyone is controlled in a limited way through its legal person, if you're operating in the subject of the legal person, but the human, who can also be everyone in the Charter, he's not limited by the regulations, and they can't apply those statutes and regulations to control and limit this designation. Black laws, citizen. A person who, by either birth or naturalization, is a member of a political community. So when you say you are a citizen of Canada, you are saying you're a member of a political community, owing allegiance to the community. So you have an obligation to the political party, the monarchy, and being entitled to enjoy all its civil rights and freedoms. So the second object or subject that we see in operation in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is a citizen. There's a term there that says citizen. Now, as soon as you mention the word citizen, what you're referring to is a subject of the Queen. Someone who's pledged allegiance to the Queen's political party and to the monarchy itself, and someone who is saying that you are my ruler and I will follow you, and I am serving you. Serving you. As I said, they owe allegiance to the Queen, and they are in servitude for the Queen. All the benefits and the rights that they get, the citizen, is given to them from the Queen through her government. But in turn, you are considered to be a servant, and therefore you are in servitude. Well, you get the picture. So, in servitude. Fundamental freedoms, Canadian Charter of Freedoms. Everyone has the following fundamental freedoms. Freedom of conscience and religion, freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication, freedom of peaceful assembly, and freedom of association. Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Freedoms. All human beings, all, are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience, and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. So in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Articles 2, it states that everyone has the freedom of association. Now when we look at everyone, remember here that everyone means a human. We're looking at it from the capacity of it being a human being. We say everyone to us means a human being. So if everyone has the freedom of association, then that means that we have the right to choose or not to choose if we want to serve Canada or be part of Canada and in the systems that they've created. So in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 4, it states that no one shall be held in servitude. So the human, because the Universal Declaration states that no human can be held in servitude, when you come to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, when they're speaking about the human under the designation of everyone, Canada affords them the option or the freedom to associate them. Supposed to, because it says that everyone has the freedom of association. So that intrinsic right, the intrinsic right that's attached to us as a human in the Universal Charter that says we cannot be held in servitude, is expressed in the Canadian Charter for the everyone, that he has freedom of association. But it's not expressed for the person, and it's not expressed for the citizen, because the person and the citizen is under obligations because they were stripped of the freedoms that the human has. Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Freedoms, Article 4. No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. So in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the everyone is granted the freedom of association. Now, freedom of association, notice that word freedom. Forget about the rest for now, just the word freedom. Freedom. We talk about this a lot. We are born free. We should be free. This is not right what's going on. Well, they use the word freedom of association because they know that this is a situation about us being free or not being free. And it says that freedom is a fundamental, it's an intrinsic right, it's an inalienable right that your human being possesses. So we look at it and say it's fundamental and intrinsic, freedom. And the human, he always has the right to be free, the human, always. And that's why you'll see it again expressed in the Universal Charter of Declaration of Human Rights and Freedoms, that as a last resort, that human, is entitled to rebellion so that he can be free from a system that refuses to let him go. So this is something you have to accept and realize, that in all states and in all places you are free. You have freedom. It is something that belongs to you. And no one can encroach on that freedom. And no one is supposed to encroach on that freedom. And if they do, there is remedy in law, in the systems that they've created. Whereas it is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse, as a last resort, to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law. Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom states that everyone has the right to life and liberty and the security of the person, and not to be deprived thereof except by the fundamental operation of the principles of justice. So what they're saying is that you can be stripped and deprived of all these rights through an operation of law. And that's exactly what they do. Your rights that are attached to you as a human, as a man or woman, are stripped from you through your legal person. And your legal person is not alive in law, as we know. So under law now, you stand not alive, not with liberty, and not with the security of your person. For more information about the security of the person, you're going to have to watch the Patrimony video series. To continue on, so Article 7 of the Charter says that you have life, and you have the right to it, you have liberty, and you have the right to it, except if it's been stripped away from you by an operation of law, which it has been. Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Article 7, 8, and 9. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. Everyone has the right to be secure against unreasonable search and seizure. Everyone has the right not to be arbitrarily detained or imprisoned. Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Articles 8, 9, and 10, they all start with everyone. And it talks about what this everyone, what this human is guaranteed. It speaks about his intrinsic rights. It's being expressed here in these articles. Now that combines with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Freedoms, Article 8. When you see and you go and read there, it's expressing the rights for the human to be free, to have freedom from being strictly have law imposed upon them. So everyone in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms has been afforded some extra liberties and some extra rights that you see. So they are sort of trying to recognize the human in operation within the Charter. However, the full expression of the human rights are still not in operation of this Charter. That's why you have to jump into Article 26. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Article 26. The guarantee in this Charter of certain rights, and freedoms shall not be construed as denying the existence of any other rights or freedoms that exist in Canada. So Canada was institutional in creating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They had a big part in it, and they did sign on to that charter. So Canada recognizes those rights that are given to you, to your human being, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That's why when you look in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, you find in Article 26, it says, the certain rights that are given to you in the Canadian Charter, it does not remove any other right or freedoms that exist in Canada. So they are recognizing the fact that there are other rights that exist in Canada that are apart and outside of the Charter. And those rights and those freedoms are granted to you through the Universal Declaration of Rights and Freedoms. You find some of them expressed within the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but not all of them. And the ones that you need to go and seek relief from, you can find them in the Universal Declaration of Charter of Rights and Freedoms.